For some reason, I've owned almost 60 cars in my life. I guess maybe due to lack of self-control. Anyway, today let's talk about every single car I've ever owned. Okay, so yeah, it's not really a great idea to own this many vehicles in your life, but I've done it, and there are so many to talk about today that I don't want to spend a ton of time on each one, or else this video is going to be like 4 hours long. So I guess what I'll do is I'll go through each car and tell you maybe one or two memorable things about each vehicle. All right, let's go. So my first ever vehicle was a 1983 Ford Econoline van. It was brown, very brown, with a lot of rust. So much rust and so much brown that we called it Brown Sunshine, kind of named after that White Zombie song, Black Sunshine. I really liked owning a van back in high school. I could drive my friends around and there was a lot of space for stuff. On a few occasions, I had my friend Adam set up a drum set in the back of the van and he would play while I would drive around. It was pretty awesome. There was another time where I think we might have taken some of those balls from the McDonald's playground and filled the back of my van entirely with them. Yeah, should I admit that on camera? I didn't steal the balls. Somebody else must have done it. Anyway, moving on to the next car. So the second car I ever owned was a 1978 Chevy Malibu, and I love this car. It was blue with like a cocaine white interior, vinyl seats that got really hot in the summer and really sticky in the summer. But anyway, I still loved it. It was a 4-speed manual transmission vehicle, had bucket seats, had rally wheels, and I just love the shape. For years and years, when I would draw cars, I would draw the 78 Malibu. I just love that car, and I would love to find one again, especially if it's a manual. So those first two cars were handed down to me from my parents, but the third car that I have on this list I bought with my own money. It was a 1987 Toyota Tercel. And now this car had no power, it was very slow, and it was in stark contrast to some of the sportier cars that my friends had. I love the fact that it was a hatchback. I took it on a bunch of road trips. So at one point, my sister borrowed it for a couple weeks. She drove it all over New York and New Jersey. And I asked her to top up the oil now and then because it did burn a little bit of oil. And when she brought the car back to me, the oil cap was missing and there was just oil sprayed all over the engine and the hood, and it was just like dripping everywhere. And I checked the oil and there was zero oil left in the engine. It kind of like sprayed everywhere. And unsurprisingly, a few months later, the car died. It threw a rod when I was delivering pizza. Got stranded with a bunch of pizza in the back of my car, so at least when I was stranded waiting for a tow truck, I had something to eat. Okay, the fourth car I ever bought, my 87 Volkswagen Scirocco. Now, I've talked about this car in other videos. It was by far the least reliable vehicle that I've ever owned. I loved how it looked, I loved how it drove, but it was pretty terrible. It treated me poorly. It left me stranded in New Mexico. It's broken down far more times than I can count. I don't even really want to talk about this car anymore. Let's go on to the next one. So the next car I owned was a 1991 Prizm GSi. This was a hatchback, black 5-speed manual. It's got the 4AGE engine under the hood. A very rare car, one of 237 GSi hatchbacks built that year, although I didn't know that at the time. I just thought it was kind of a cool, sporty, weird, quirky hatchback. I love that car, but I couldn't really afford it at the time, so I ended up selling it. All right, up next, my 1986 Chevy Nova. Now this car had 190,000 miles on it. I bought it for $1,000 and I drove it everywhere. I drove it across the country a couple times. It was a very, very reliable vehicle. So one of the times that I drove it across the US, it was filled with everything that I owned, like every last item. And it was kind of overloaded maybe a little bit. And we were going up this grade somewhere in like Colorado or New Mexico or something. And I could not get the thing to go faster than 30 miles an hour. It just was not possible. Yeah, not a quick car, but it was just really incredibly reliable. And I missed that car. I wish I had never sold it. All right, the seventh car I ever owned was a 99 Nissan Maxima SE. Now this was the most expensive car that I had bought up until that point. I think I paid like 15 grand for it or something in 2001. And it had these terrible chrome wheels on it that I had wanted to replace, but I just never got around to it. But it was a very quick car, very luxurious for me. It had a leather interior. So this Maxima was the first vehicle that I bought from a major car dealership. And yes, I got screwed because I was young and I didn't know what I was doing. I paid way too much for this car. But I think I've learned from that mistake, and now I just buy cheap, crappy cars. Okay, next up, a 2001 Volkswagen Passat Wagon. Now this was kind of mainly my wife's car, but we drove it a lot together on road trips across the country. And it was a pretty decent car. It was good to fit our dogs in the back of it. But like my other Volkswagen experience, it wasn't all that reliable. It did this weird thing where it would just like lose power on the freeway. We could never quite figure out why it did that. So we kept it for a few years and then ended up selling it for something that was a little bit more reliable. So around that time, I'd also bought a 96 Nissan 200SX SER. Now, some of you might be familiar with the Sentra SER, which was kind of an iconic little sport compact car from the 90s. Now, the 200SX doesn't get quite as much love as that Sentra did, but it's still a lot of fun. It's got the same SR20 motor and it made 140 horsepower. It was a lot of fun on a back road, and you just don't really see them anymore. All right, number 10, I bought another Maxima. I have no idea why I did it. I just kind of like got the itch to buy a car. Now, this wasn't a Maxima SE. This time it was a Maxima GXE, but it was a 5-speed manual. There weren't really any memorable stories with this car. It was just sort of a boring Maxima, but it was pretty reliable. So back in 2002, I made the mistake of buying a 1966 Buick Skylark hardtop. Now, the vehicle wasn't terrible. I mean, actually, it was in pretty bad shape, but I only spent like $2,000 on it. But the problem is I couldn't just leave it alone and drive it as is. I thought I had the capability of restoring this vehicle. And over the next few years, I realized that, no, I'm not good at that kind of thing. So yeah, the car was in pieces for many, many years. Eventually, I got it all fixed up and put back together, but it was kind of a big waste of time. I also bought a 72 Buick LeSabre because I was gonna pull the 455 engine out of that car and put it into my Skylark. I never ended up doing that. I ended up just making this sort of a parts car and selling off all the parts and then having it towed away. So that was kind of useless as well. Okay, so the next one is my 1994 purple Chevrolet S10 pickup truck. I bought it from a coworker for like $800 and it needed a fair amount of work. So I bought the truck and I started heading home on the day that I bought it, and it started raining and I didn't realize that the windshield wipers didn't work. So the whole trip home I was just sticking my head out the window to actually see. Not great. I used it to haul a bunch of crap, including a Buick engine and transmission. This truck was useful on occasion, but I never really liked driving it, so I sold it after a couple months. And when I was actually putting my Skylark back together, I had found a 66 Buick Special that was like half finished. So what I ended up doing was sort of combining parts from my Skylark and the Special to form one car. I sort of pieced these two cars back together, and then I had a pretty decent, fun Buick Special to drive for a while. It had a 455 Buick in it, made a ton of power. It was super loud and super stupid, but it was kind of fun. But gas mileage was just non-existent. You put gas in the tank and you go like 2 or 3 miles before you ran out. So I actually owned a 78 Pontiac Trans Am for a while. It was actually my wife's family member's car. Her family member crashed it and she gave it to us for like $500 or something like that. We thought we would be able to fix it up, and we should have known that I was never gonna get around to it because I did such a terrible job piecing together my Skylark. So we ended up selling it to this guy who did restore it and it ended up looking pretty nice when he was done. Next up is my 1990 Toyota pickup truck. This was my dad's old truck. He had it for a very long time. Super reliable. We used it for a ton of things. When me and my wife bought our first house, we used it for like Home Depot trips. It ended up being a really, really useful vehicle. All right, so the next car on my list is a car that I still own to this day, my 2005 Scion XB, which I bought new. I've made a bunch of videos about it, so I won't go into too much detail here, but it's been a great car, one of the most reliable cars I've ever owned in my entire life. Right, next up is my 1991 Mazda Spec Miata race car. Now this is up there with maybe one of my favorite cars I've ever owned. So much fun on a racetrack. I actually bought it having never been on a racetrack before. So the first time I was ever on a racetrack was in a brand new race car on a racetrack that I've never been to. And yeah, it didn't go well. At least I didn't crash the car. But over time, I ended up sort of becoming a solid mid-pack driver with a couple trophies here and there. I think there's a couple trophies back there somewhere. Tons of fun. So to tow that race car, I had bought a 2005 Dodge Ram 2500 Cummins diesel. And yes, that's probably way overkill for towing just a Miata on an open trailer, but I did it. And unfortunately, it was at a time when diesel prices were just through the roof, so I ended up selling it not too long after. Oh, here's a car that I miss. I had a 1990 Chevy Caprice 9C1 police package. I love the way that thing looked. It was just super boxy. The fact that they were still selling a car that had like 1970s styling in 1990 was something that I thought was pretty funny and cool. Yeah, that car was not reliable. It was not fast. There wasn't anything that it did particularly well other than look awesome. I wouldn't buy another one, but I definitely kind of miss having that, if not only to just look at. So moving on to the next one, it's a vehicle that I still have today. It's my 2016 Toyota Prius. This has been also one of my most reliable vehicles that I've ever owned. Still get like 52 to 53 miles per gallon. It's been great. Probably not gonna get rid of it until the hybrid battery finally dies. Then I bought another truck for some reason. I bought a 2008 Nissan Titan, and I used that to tow the race car for a while. I think a lot of people forget about how capable and how good the Nissan Titan was when they first came out. But once again, it was sort of overkill to tow just a little Miata. So the next vehicle I bought was the Nissan 200SX SER, the second one I've ever owned, that would eventually become Liam Nissan. And this definitely goes down as probably one of the most fun vehicles I've ever owned because I got to race on racetracks with my friends and come up with this stupid Liam Nissan theme. I can't recommend doing 24 Hours of Lemons enough. So back in 2014, my wife and I bought a house and we were doing a bunch of work on it. So we needed a pickup truck again. This time I found a 1999 Toyota Tacoma with high miles, but of course it still ran great because it's a Toyota truck. We used it to haul rocks, mulch, wood, doors, windows, trash. It was a great little truck. It's very possible I overloaded it with rocks one time when I was driving it. It kind of felt like the frame was flexing. Oops. When we started racing Liam Nissan, I sold my Tacoma and I picked up this Titan so we could tow with it. It had high miles and the interior was kind of falling apart, but it was an excellent tow vehicle. I guess aside from like the 7 miles per gallon it got while towing. This truck unfortunately met its demise in an insane crash on the 5 freeway in Northern California. I was towing Liam Nissan back home from a race weekend, and this woman in a Trailblazer starts to pass me on the left-hand side, and I don't think she realized that her lane had ended. Not good, right? So she hits the shoulder, loses control in the dirt, and slams right into the side of my trailer. I tried like hell to keep the truck straight, but then the trailer started to fishtail, and it sends us sliding off the road. And the trailer smashes into my truck, crunching into the bed and pushing in the rear wheels. It was a surreal slow motion experience. My brother was in the passenger seat freaking out, and somehow I was as calm as can be. Not really sure why. We were just along for the ride. And as we were spinning, I caught a glimpse of the woman's Trailblazer, watching it roll over 3 times. Yeah, it was nuts. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, and she had the audacity to try to blame this on me, but thankfully the insurance company agreed that she was 100% at fault with her crazy pass maneuver on the left-hand side. That was nuts. Anyway, I really like that truck. Kind of miss it. All right, so the next one is the first vehicle that I've ever featured on this channel, my 1974 Datsun B210. Now, I took this on a bunch of little road trips. It was definitely the slowest vehicle I've ever owned, but I love that weird sort of bug-like shape, those hubcaps that look like somebody hit them on the side with a hammer. Just a fun, cool little brown car. Bought it for $1,500, and now I can't even find one for less than like 5 or 6, so I probably should have kept it. So the next on the list is Poobaru. Yes, that 1998 Subaru Legacy wagon that me and my brother used for the Gambler 500 rally. And if you haven't seen it, you should probably watch my Poobaru video where we get stuck in Gambler's Gulch. It was kind of a very stressful occasion, but it was a lot of fun getting our car back out of there after being stranded for a day. All right, after that, I bought a 2000 Ford F-250 7.3 diesel. Once again, buying these stupid big trucks that I don't really have a whole lot of use for, but at that time we were using it to tow Liam Nissan to the racetrack. And unfortunately, the previous owner had lifted it and put these stupid Bushwhacker fender flares on the side of it. It looked terrible. I didn't really like driving around in it just because I did not like how it looked, but it towed okay. Actually, you know what? It didn't even really tow that well. I think the lift kind of ruined the towing capabilities of that thing. It was kind of a dog going up some of these hills around here. So I kept it for a while and ended up selling it. After that, I bought a 1986 Nissan Stanza wagon known as the Prairie overseas and the Multi in Canada. Now, this is a vehicle that's very unique and it's very practical. It's got a lot of space considering the exterior dimensions are not that large, and it's kind of known for having no B-pillar, so you don't really want to get into a side impact with because chances are the other car is just gonna go right through it. All right, next up is my 1991 Geo Prizm GSi. Yes, I bought yet another Geo Prizm GSi, so I've actually owned 2 of the 237 GSi Prizm hatchbacks of that year. I bought it from somebody in Utah and road tripped it all the way back to Los Angeles and stopped at some really cool locations along the way. Almost got stranded a couple times, but this old kind of piece of crap did make it home. And it was still kind of fun to drive with a 4AGE under the hood and the 5-speed transmission, but it needed a lot of work. And I never bothered restoring it because the paint was just so terrible and the interior was sort of terrible, so I didn't really think it was worth it. But it was kind of a fun car to own for a while. All right, so my 87 Chrysler 5th Avenue. Now this vehicle had the most comfortable seats out of any vehicle that I've ever owned. Just so supremely comfortable. The car wasn't that big, but it just sort of floated around like it was a big boat from the 70s. It needed a lot of work. It was almost impossible to get the thing to pass smog. And when I wanted to sell it, I could not find a buyer. Just nobody wanted this car. Feels like these are kind of coming around a little bit more in popularity now, but at the time, nobody cared. Now here's a car that I still own and one of my favorite cars I've ever had. My 1988 Chevrolet Nova twin cam. I wanted one of these when I was a kid and I finally found one after many, many years looking. The twin cam is a 1-year only model and they only built about 3,000, so I'd imagine there's only a handful left on the road. I love this car. It's low power, but it's lightweight and tons of fun to drive. This is one vehicle that I'm pretty sure I'm going to keep for many years to come. So next I bought my 1990 Pontiac Turbo Grand Prix. Now this is one of like 3,000 Turbo Grand Prix ever built. Pontiac made some really incredibly cool interiors in the 80s and 90s, and this had probably the coolest interior of any car that I've ever owned. So many buttons, just like thousands of buttons it seemed. After that, I bought a 1997 BMW 740iL, the long wheelbase 740. And actually, you'd think this vehicle wouldn't be that reliable considering it's an old BMW with high miles, but it was pretty decently reliable. Yeah, all the interior pieces were broken and completely falling apart, but it was kind of a nice car to drive around. Just don't touch any of the interior pieces, otherwise they'll just disintegrate into your hands. All right, so the next one is a vehicle that I owned for quite a while. It's my 86 Porsche 944 Turbo, one of the most fun vehicles that I've ever had. I love the styling of it. It just drips pure 80s nostalgia. In fact, I would always listen to 80s music when I was driving the car around just because it just seemed right. Now that car had over 300,000 miles, and you might think that's kind of a lot for a 944 Turbo, and yes, it was. It was not exactly a reliable vehicle. I put a ton of money into it, but I'd still say the ownership experience was worth it because it was just so much fun on a canyon road. After that, I bought a BMW E46. It was a 2003 330Ci. Unfortunately, it was an automatic transmission. So you have this wonderful chassis, but it was sort of hindered by this kind of crappy automatic transmission. But it was still kind of fun to drive. I bought that one with the intention of flipping it because my coworker just wanted to get rid of it. So I put some money into it and ended up making a little bit of money on that one. After that, I thought I'd try my hand at buying a car from an auction. I bought a 2015 Ram 1500. I don't really know why I chose that one. It just seemed like it was the right price. So yeah, no real interesting stories with this car. I bought it at auction, drove it around for a while, and sold it for about what I paid for it. I got some lessons in terms of what to buy and what not to buy at auction. Kind of a waste of time, but a good learning experience, I guess. So after that, I didn't learn from my mistake, so I bought another auction car, my 1997 Ford Probe GT. Now I've made a bunch of videos on this car. Yeah, it's up for sale, so yeah, it's not gonna be in my fleet too much longer. So being a $300 vehicle from auction, it just sort of fought me at every stage. It needed a lot of work, but I did eventually get it to the point where it was pretty reliable and pretty fun to drive. And when it's gone, I'm definitely going to miss it because it was a very unique car. You just don't see many of them around, and it was purple. So another car that I bought from a coworker was a 2002 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and I had this for a while. Drove it around for a little bit. I used it to tow here and there, and then eventually the engine just kind of gave up the ghost. It started making a terrible sound, and it was gonna cost way more money to get it fixed than the vehicle was worth, so I ended up selling it to a shop for like $500 or something like that. Okay, here's another vehicle I still own, my 92 Jeep Wrangler. Now this is a vehicle that I got for free. It needed a lot of work. It was in really rough shape, but I do still need to revamp the interior, and I'll do that in another video. And I also want to take it off-roading here and there. So we'll make more videos with that coming soon. All right, we're getting close. This is the, 41st car I've ever owned. So this is the 1985 Mitsubishi Galant. I bought this because, I don't know, it just looks so cool. I love the shape of it. It just sort of had like a French kind of vibe going on. It sort of reminded me like a Peugeot or a Citroen or something like that. And this car needed some work. It had some pretty serious leaks, but I got it to the point where it was running pretty decently. I drove it around for a while, made a couple videos with it, and I ended up selling it to somebody who was super excited to get it, which I was glad about. All right, next up is a vehicle that I never showed on the channel because I owned it for such a short period of time. It was a 1989 Volkswagen Fox. It's one of those cars I got from auction, but it needed so much work, and at the time, I didn't really have time to get to it. So I ended up selling it for basically what I paid for it. All right, so the next one was also a stupid auction purchase, a 1994 Lexus GS300. I've talked about this on other videos, but yeah, a lot of work that it needed. Didn't have time to get to it. I didn't have the experience to fix it the way I wanted to. I ended up selling it to a friend of a friend who did get it fixed. So continuing my terrible purchases from auto auctions, I bought a 94 Toyota Previa all-track, which is the all-wheel drive version. Now this vehicle had a few issues here and there, but it wasn't in completely terrible shape. It was kind of fun to drive around for a couple years. I ended up selling it to my friend Serge, who really fixed it up and lifted it and put some cool wheels on it. And he's turned it into kind of like an off-road camping machine, which is pretty neat. The 45th car I ever owned was a 99 Acura Integra LS. I made a few videos with this car. Super low mile car. It only had like 97, 98,000 miles, something like that. And it was just kind of a rare sight. It was an unmodified Integra, where over the years, so many of these things have gotten clapped out and modified beyond the point of recognition. I drove it around on some Canyon Road drives, enjoyed it for a while, and ended up selling it on Bring a Trailer. All right, so here's another car that I got for free, a 98 Subaru Legacy in this really lovely green color. My friends had owned this car for a very long time and they were getting rid of it, and they thought, oh, Ethan will take on any project. Why don't we just give it to him? And yes, I took it on. It needed quite a bit of work. It took a long time to get the thing to pass smog, but eventually I got it to pass. Drove it around for a while. I thought I might turn it into another Gambler 500 build, but I ended up giving it to my brother-in-law, who drove it around for a couple of years because he needed some really just good basic transportation. And eventually it started burning a lot of coolant, but it lasted a long time for him. So next up is my 2001 Toyota Tacoma four-wheel drive. Now this was my dad's truck. I actually did a video with it when I was back in Massachusetts visiting them. When they came out to California to move here, they took the truck with them, and I drove it around for a while, did some truck things with it, and eventually I tried to sell the thing, and while I was trying to sell it, somebody stole it. Somebody stole the truck right when I was showing it to them. You can check out this video if you want to see that stupid story, but eventually I got the car back and found a buyer that wasn't actually going to try to steal the car from me. All right, so the other Volkswagen Fox that I bought was actually the much more rare Volkswagen Fox Wagon, but it does have a very similar story to the previous Fox that I owned. I didn't have time to get to it. I bought it, owned it for like a year, and yes, just never did anything. It just kind of like collected dust, got dirty, and that's it. And then I eventually ended up selling it to somebody that wanted to get it fixed up. So I had big plans for this car, but just couldn't deal with all the projects that I had and never got around to it. All right, so my 92 Ford F-150 Flareside. Now I bought this from a neighbor. I actually found it on Craigslist first and I thought, oh, I actually know whose truck that is. So I went over, took a look at it, bought it that same day. Drove it around for a while and fixed up a bunch of stuff and ended up selling it on Bring a Trailer and made a little bit of money on it. So that wasn't so bad. So a couple memorable things with this Flareside, even though I didn't own it that long, was taking it to the Radwood Car Show. Also with my friend Eric, we did a comparison video where we compared a brand new F-150 to my 1992 F-150. And it was pretty shocking to see how much pickup trucks have grown over the years. The next vehicle I bought was a 1990 Pontiac Grand Am SE, had the quad 4 motor in it. I mainly bought it because I liked the wheels and it just sort of brought me back to that time when you'd see these cars everywhere and now you don't see them anywhere at all because they've all been crushed. So I had that one for a while and fixed a bunch of stuff. I put way too much money into that car. So I actually drove it up Angeles Crest Highway one time, and that's not a car you normally expect to see up there. It's usually like Porsches and other like actually quick cars. But it was kind of fun to take this vehicle up to Newcomb's Ranch and give people a glimpse of a car that has just disappeared from American roads. But unfortunately, it stalled and I could not get the car back down the hill, so I had to get a tow. Pontiac life. So the next one is a vehicle that I wish I still had, my 2019 Honda Civic Type R. Now this is probably the nicest vehicle that I've ever owned. By far the best handling vehicle I've ever owned. Also probably the most ostentatious and outlandish vehicle I've ever owned. But I just didn't drive it enough, so I ended up selling it and now I regret it. All right, so the next one is probably the stupidest purchase I've ever made in my life. I bought a 1997 Cadillac DeVille with the North Star engine. And yeah, the North Star had a blown head gasket like they all do, or like a lot of them do. And I didn't have the money to fix it up. I made a bunch of tactical errors in terms of buying this vehicle and thinking that I'd be able to fix it and make money selling it. So no, that wasn't the case. Stupid idea to buy this car, and I sold it. It's kind of a similar story with my 91 Land Cruiser that I bought from auction. Needed a lot more work than I had thought. It ended up being a salvage title vehicle, so it wasn't really going to be worth fixing up. And I just kind of found out that I didn't really enjoy working on it, so I sold that one too. So I'm a big fan of a lot of those JDM cars that were never sold here in the States. So for a long time, I wanted to import a vehicle, and I finally did it. I imported a 1993 Toyota Chaser Tourer V. Now, since I'm here in the United States and I didn't actually go to Japan to take a look at the car before I imported it, it was bought sight unseen, and I didn't realize that I had purchased a basket case. This vehicle had like 150 pounds of wiring for old stereo systems and lighting systems, and none of it worked. There was a weird kind of snake-like thing in the gas tank, but once we took care of all that crap, it was an amazing car to drive. So much fun, incredibly fast, sounded amazing, and looked really rad too. So this was another vehicle that I brought to a Radwood car show, and it was really great to see the reactions of people that had never seen a Chaser before. So the first electric vehicle that I've ever owned was my 2011 Nissan Leaf. Now I got this from my friend Brad. He had wrapped it in this sort of radioactive yellow color and put these tri-spoke wheels from the 90s onto it. And I just loved how it looked. And I just wanted the experience of owning an electric car. So I owned that one for a while and did some commuting with it, drove my kid to school, and then sold it a couple months later. Okay, so what's a car list without some big Altima energy on it? The most recent car that I bought was the 2005 Nissan Altima. It's actually in pretty good shape for an Altima, had a lot of miles, but not really that many issues. So I have no idea why I bought this car. It was beige, it was an Altima, but it did have a manual transmission, so that gave it a little tiny bit of fun, I guess. I guess at the time I just sort of wanted an anonymous vehicle that had a manual transmission, and this fit the bill perfectly. Okay, so here's the tally, 56 cars total. We've got 14 sedans, 11 hatchbacks, 10 coupes, 10 pickups, 5 wagons, 3 SUVs, 2 vans, and 1 convertible. And with this many cars, only 3 countries are represented here. 26 cars are from Japanese brands, 23 from American brands, and 7 German cars. I should probably buy a French car next, right? Okay, in terms of powertrains, we have 28 4-cylinders, 15 8-cylinders, 12 6-cylinders, and 1 EV. And when it comes to transmissions, I thought maybe I might have owned more manuals than autos, but alas, I have not. We've got 30 automatics and 26 manuals. All right, so that's it for my list of every single vehicle that I've ever owned in my life. And yes, it's pretty stupid to own almost 60 cars during your lifetime because there's all of this stress of like buying and selling them and all of the money you gotta put into fixing them up. Yeah, I've made a few bucks here and there selling cars, but I've probably lost way more money than I've made. I know that's for a fact certain. And now that I think about it, I think I'm gonna cry. Anyway, you know, I don't really know why I do it. I guess I like to experience different vehicles and I guess driving myself a little bit insane every single day. I certainly don't recommend owning this many vehicles. Do as I say, not as I do, right? Anyway, how many cars have you owned during your lifetime? I hope it's a lot less than 60. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon so you can get notified of all my videos. If you want to help support the channel, please consider buying a Hello Road t-shirt at helloroad.tv/shop. After talking about 60 cars, I've just about lost my voice. For the few who have made it this far in the video, thanks so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon.